And these people began to go back into very interesting past lives. And I know the skeptics are always saying the person will be Cleopatra or Napoleon, always somebody famous. I have never found this. And I belong to different hypnosis groups now, and I don't know any other hypnotists who have found this either. We have found many of the lives have been very dull and boring and normal. You got to remember there's a whole lot more normal people out there, common people, ordinary people, than there are those that are famous. How many people in the world today get their names in the newspaper are there so that people can identify them? Majority of the people that are around today and that have been around forever are just ordinary people living ordinary lives. When they go back to these kind of lives, I call them digging potatoes lives because that's maybe the most interesting thing they do. They live in the country, they're a farmer, and they just farm. And very little happens in a life like that is even eventful. So it's hard to find anything that is even important in that lifetime. But this makes it more validity because this is the way most people's lives are. My job is to find out why they were shown that life and what it has to do with their lives now.
That was the voice of past life regression hypnotist Dolores Cannon, who passed away in 2012. And throughout her 30-year career in hypnotism, she, in her books, explores many different concepts, including alien abductions and past life regression, mostly in an attempt to explore the complicated and convoluted nature of our universe. And many of the people that went to Dolores Cannon arrived having had very strange experiences. Dolores hypnotized people using a very deep level of trance, which is known as quantum hypnosis. Her legacy lives on today through her books, through the people who are trained in her quantum techniques, and in many of the videos that are present on YouTube, which talks about some of the theories and information that her subjects reported under this deep level of hypnosis. So just to clarify, Dolores Cannon was not actually channeling. She was not psychic. She was simply hypnotizing these people. And the reports that come out in her books are stories of the people who were hypnotized. So in today's show, I'm going to be talking about the concept of death, of loss, and of rebirth. And I'm going to be exploring some of the concepts and theories of Dolores Cannon that she developed through her years of past life regression hypnotism. And I'll be doing this in an attempt to explain how I, alongside many people, look to certain forms of spirituality, different theories that are common across many different religions, in an attempt to make sense of the loss and the grief and the normal human emotions that we feel at certain times in our lives. Marion Woodman once wrote, "Without an understanding of myth or religion, without an understanding of the relationship between destruction and creation, death and rebirth, the individual suffers the mysteries of life as meaningless mayhem alone." So many people go through life believing that there is no higher power than ourselves, that at the end there's nothing. I personally choose to believe in reincarnation. Is something that I have always felt that resonates with me. And in terms of my own religious beliefs, I take my ideas from many different religions, but in terms of the metaphysical aspects of reincarnation, this is just what resonates with me. Now, if we think about the religions that accept reincarnation, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Taoism, Gnosticism, and Kabbalah, which is the mystic branch of Judaism, also talks about reincarnation. Yet the three main religions that generally reject the concept of reincarnation would be Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Now, think about this. What does reincarnation fundamentally imply? Well, it implies that all of us are responsible for every single condition in our lives, cause and effect. And what would happen if society believed in this, knowing that our actions led to consequences in our next lives, that karma was real? Many of us would actually take more responsibility for our actions, and collectively we would start becoming better human beings. However, if reincarnation didn't exist, implying that we only live once and that our life circumstances are just completely random, decided by the flip of a coin, well, what kind of behavior does that encourage? It encourages people doing whatever they want, abuse, people taking advantage of each other, the sort of philosophy of every man for himself. So not needing to take responsibility for our own actions because our life conditions are just random and our consciousness ends on death, then there's nothing else to consider. But think about this. Of the two categories of religions over the centuries, which ones of these have been the most peaceful? And which one of these have been responsible for millions of deaths across history? And assuming that there's a group of individuals in control of society, then which of these two sets of religious beliefs would benefit them to have continued control over society? The ones that do believe in reincarnation, or the ones that don't? I believe with anything to do with spirituality and anything to do with religion that we need to use our discernment, and we need to take what resonates with us and leave the rest. So this is something that everybody needs to do if they are to make sense of any religious text out there or any metaphysical concept which is, I guess, not proven by quote unquote science, whatever that means, really. So with Dolores Cannon, she started off as a regular hypnotist where she was hypnotizing people for the kinds of things that you would generally expect people to be hypnotized for example, giving up smoking or fear of flying, that kind of thing. And then over the years, the clients came to her with more and more unusual circumstances. And throughout the decades of her work with regressed patients, she began to realize that they would come up with stories that couldn't be substantiated in this life. They would be talking about things that they could have no knowledge of, basically. That's where Dolores Cannon's work began. Now, some of the books that I have read, and three of the main books that I have taken a lot of inspiration from, are Between Death and Life, where she talks about the experience of what happens when you actually die. So not just a near-death experience, the actual death experience, whereby when we die, we have a silver cord which is attached to us, and then when it's actually time to go, that silver cord is cut and we will move on to the other side. There is no heaven and there is no hell. In her book Between Death and Life, she talks about three of the main areas that people go to. So she begins by talking about the lower astral plane. Now, this is a place where somebody who may have died in a very low consciousness, very confused state, will generally linger. So this could be somebody that died as an alcoholic, a drug addict, somebody very, very confused, somebody that maybe took their own life. And she talks about the lower astral plane, that this is an area where, unfortunately, you haven't learned your lesson and you will probably have to come back and do the same thing again, or maybe even go to another realm, another planet, another plane of its existence where the lessons will have to be tried again. So she says that everything is a lesson. And as I said, if you didn't learn it, then you'll have to come back and do it again. She also says that when we die, you go to the place where you are vibrating. So you will go to a place where your frequency is at. So we've talked about the lower astral plane. Then she says that there's the middle astral plane. And this is what the church or religion would generally consider our version of heaven. Dolores says that you can stay there if you want. The colors, the sounds, the music, everything is beautiful. And it would be our version of heaven. So you can go there if you want. The point of our experience here on Earth is to learn. And so I'm trying to explain this right. So we are souls living out a human experience. When you die, you will go through a life review. So you're the person that judges you, not a higher power. You will be the one that has to look over everything that you've done in your life and decide where you went wrong. And you'll actually see it from the perspective of other people, all other people that you've met in your life. So karma is real. It's all a play. It's all a game. And we make a contract with all of the important people in our lives. We have soul groups, and we choose to come in the body that we're in. And we have soul groups with all of the important people in our lives. So anybody that's made a profound impact on us is somebody that we've made a soul contract with. And we can also choose to come back and experience this life on Earth with members of our soul groups in various different forms. So, for example, I could choose to come back in my next life as a female, and somebody who is my friend or my best friend in this life could come back as a family member in a different life. So we've made these contracts with the important people in our lives. Now, she'll also talk about the upper astral plane, and this is where the Temple of Wisdom is kept. This is where the library, where the Akashic records are stored. This is where you will go if you are vibrating at the highest possible frequency. So from this, I gather that the concept and the point of our lives is to experience as much as we can and to raise our frequency, to raise our vibration, to raise our consciousness to the highest level that we possibly can in order to stand the best chance of going through these schools. Earth is a school. You can't skip a grade. Now, in her book, she also talks about the idea that we originally have gone through many forms. So we may have been a rock. We may have been a plant. We may have been a tree. We have probably been animals. And then each time you ascend, each time you learn the lesson, then you ascend to the next level. This is why, for me, it's so important to understand that everything on this planet is living and breathing, and there are consequences for everything we do to one another. When we come in, we always have an exit plan, and nobody leaves until they're ready. And some people in these soul groups that I talked about before actually agree to leave together. So for example, they could leave together in an earthquake or a tsunami. And we also choose our body, we choose our own life, we choose the circumstances that we're in. A lot of people will ask, well, why is it fair that somebody was born into poverty and somebody was born into a rich family? It's because that was the decision that they made. But in many other lifetimes, they may have been the opposite. So if they chose to come into a really poor family, then in a previous life they could have been rich. So they are going through a different experience in this life. I'm going to read now from a section of another one of Dolores Cannon's books, which is called The Custodians. This book focuses mostly on people that she's regressed who were, recounting their stories of alien abductions and UFO experiences. So I'm going to read a section from this book, and then I'm also going to go on to read a section from The Convoluted Universe, which is a very complicated book. There are actually 4 or 5 parts to this book, but what I will do is when I get to that section in The Custodians, I'm going to just give one of my observations, put into question some of the things that are happening in this book, because Dolores Cannon has kind of built a very loyal following behind her, and I follow her on Facebook, and I very rarely, if ever, I've never come across anybody that has questioned some of the things that come up in her books in the way that I have. So I'll come to that later. But what I'm going to do is read a section in her book, The Custodians now. Things are not always what they appear to be. Whitley Strieber was the first author to use the term screen memories in connection with UFOs and alien abductions. This is a memory of an event or a thing that is not accurate. Something has been superimposed over what is actually occurring, and the mind interprets it differently. Often, it's interpreted in a safer and gentler way so that the abductee will not be frightened or traumatized. Possibly, this is a part of the subconscious mind's defense mechanism. Its method for protecting the psyche from anything it considers harmful to remember or to see in its actuality. Often, these screen memories involve animals. Dolores Cannon had several cases where this appears to have occurred, where an overlay has been placed over the actual scene, and for some reason, owls often feature in this phenomenon. So I'm quoting directly from Dolores Cannon now. One of my clients was startled on a road late one night when an owl swooped over the highway and then over his car. Under hypnosis, we discovered it wasn't an owl at all, but an alien craft and small beings on the highway that forced him to stop. His subconscious had disguised the scene in a softer way so that he wouldn't remember what had actually occurred. In a different case, I'm about to relate an overlay memory and how it seems to also be involved with missing time. And missing time is something that very often happens with these UFO encounters. So again, I'm quoting from Dolores. I'd known Brenda for several years since we began working together in UFO investigation by using hypnosis in suspected abduction cases. One day in January 1989, when I went to her house for our regular session, she wanted to tell me about an unusual incident that had occurred in March 1988. She considered it odd, but for some reason had not mentioned it to me before. She thought I would be interested now because I was becoming more involved in the UFO phenomenon. She didn't know if it was connected with UFOs or aliens, but it definitely involved missing time and an owl. She was driving home from work in Fayetteville, a drive that normally took about half an hour, and within sight of her house in the country when the incident occurred. The sun had set, but it wasn't dark yet. She came around a curve in the road, and an owl was sitting right in the middle of the lane. It wasn't the normal type of brown owl that was usually seen in our area. It was brilliant white with silver highlights on its chest, and its eyes were very black. It was absolutely beautiful, and she slowed so that she wouldn't hit it. She assumed this was the type called a snow owl, which is normally seen in colder climates such as Canada or in the northern states. A zoologist friend later told me that it's possible for a snow owl to be seen in Arkansas in the depth of winter, but there shouldn't be any as late as spring. This would have been a rare occurrence if it were a real owl. When she first spotted it, it was sitting facing away from her, but it turned its head to look at her. Then it flapped its wings and flew up straight towards the truck. Its wingspan was as wide as the windshield. It startled her, and it skimmed over the roof of the truck. Brenda twisted around to look out the back window, but there was nothing. No sign of the owl. No sign of any type of bird. When she turned, she was shocked to see it was dark outside. It crossed her mind that it had suddenly gotten dark fast. Totally confused, she had to turn on her headlights to drive the last quarter mile to our house. When she entered the house, she looked at the clock out of habit. Instead of being around 5:30, as it should have been, it was almost 7 o'clock. What had happened to an hour and a half? She was positive of the time she left work because she didn't work overtime in the summer. She thought it was a peculiar incident, and she heard that sometimes when something odd like that happens, something has been blocked from your subconscious memory. We decided to devote our hypnosis session to discovering what, if anything, had happened during that missing time. She didn't think it would bother her if she found out something strange had happened. When we started the session, I took her back to the latter part of March 1988, and she immediately entered the scene where she was driving her truck home. Along the way, she was discussing her day's work and that she was worried about her mother, who had recently been in a car accident. Those were the thoughts that she was having as she was driving. She was also tired and anxious to get home and relax. She was almost home when she came around a curve and saw something standing in the middle of the lane. She stopped the truck so she wouldn't run over it. In her conscious memory of the event, she thought she only slowed down, but she now saw that she came to a complete halt. Another surprise under hypnosis was that what she saw in the road was not an owl. What is it in the road? It's hard to say. I suppose if we lived in olden times, I would call it an angel. An angel? A being from a higher plane, perhaps. I see a man standing in the middle of my lane. He glows white all over, and his clothes appear to be white as well. Do you mean the glow is like an aura around him? Sort of. She had difficulty explaining. It's kind of like a black and white picture that's been overexposed. You know, a very light coloured all over and very radiating. It's not like a glow from a light. No, it's hard to describe because it's sort of like that, but it's sort of like an aura, like an overexposed picture. And his clothes are white too. At least that's the way they look to me. It could be I'm not able to perceive the colours correctly since he's got so much light around him. Even his hair glows white. Can you see what his features look like? That's hard to do because there's so much light. From the best I can tell you, they resemble classical Greek features. You know, like you see on a Greek sculpture. Very even, with like a level forehead and a nice straight nose, and very balanced features. Okay, so how tall is he? 6 foot, 6'2" maybe? He's large then. Yes, he's a good size. He's standing there looking around, and I can see rays coming out of his eyes. When he's looking towards me, I can't see them. But when he looks off to the side, I can see these rays coming out from his eyes. As he walked around towards the driver door, he did a gesture over the truck. He waved his hand just once. He did it parallel to the hood of the truck and then swooped up parallel to the windshield. His hand was about 6 to 8 inches above the truck when he did this. Apparently, this is what her conscious mind recorded as the owl flying low over the truck. It was obvious that the false overlay of the white owl came from her conscious mind, because in trance she had no hesitation in identifying it as a person. She never once mentioned an owl. So I read that story from the Custodians just to give you an idea there of the level of intensity with which Dolores Cannon would get her clients into trance, so that these very strange and unexplained situations that had occurred under the level of trance, they became much clearer. And how in these types of cases, whatever being or entity it is that is taking control or abducting or hijacking the consciousness of these people will sometimes place an overlay to make the abduction less traumatic. And this is something that gets more and more apparent and more intense in the Convoluted Universe book, which I'm also going to read from. Okay, so my thoughts on alien abductions at this point are that they occur on a metaphysical level. So, whereas a lot of people will be like, you know, aliens, UFOs, etc., they don't exist, they are government orchestrated, they are made up in people's minds, etc. I personally do believe in UFOs. I personally do believe in these abductions, but I think that they occur on a different dimensional layer. So I believe that these entities, whatever they are, have a way of bending our space, our time, and allowing us to see them, but in a different spectrum. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's actually been said that the human eye can only see between 430 to 770 terahertz, and our ears can only detect sound between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz. These ranges make up a fraction of the total sound and light frequency range. Now, this means there's a lot going on around us that we cannot hear or see. In the Custodians, Dolores Cannon is very often asked, well, do these abductions occur only at night time in, you know, remote locations where like nobody can see, where it's literally just the abductee? Why don't they happen in broad daylight, and why don't other people actually see them happening? In one particular example in the Convoluted Universe, she talks about one of her clients who worked in a office job and left her building to go and get lunch. And in the middle of a busy street in broad daylight with many other people around, she saw a flying unidentified object that hovered, and she was beamed up and abducted in broad daylight. And the point is that nobody else saw it happen. She explains how she was looking around and even shouting to other people, and nobody else could see it happen. And after the incident had happened, she was put back in the same position in the same street. Time had been distorted, so she'd lost time, and nobody else could see the craft that had abducted her. So what this tells me is that these beings, these entities, whatever they are, have got a way of manipulating the physical realm so that only the subject or the abductee can actually see it happening and other people cannot see it happening. This confusing, complex way of understanding the way that our realm works is something which makes me very intrigued and very interested, and it helps to explain that after we die and during our lives, there's much more meaning to it than we are led to believe, that we can never ever begin to fully understand. One of my favourite podcasts that I listen to is Back from the Borderline, and in one of the episodes, which I will include in the show notes, Molly interviews author and speaker Perdita Finn, who wrote a book called Take Back the Magic, Conversations with the Unseen World. And in this book, she talks about the relationship that she has with her father after he's passed on to the other side. How he was never a helpful and supportive person in her life. But after he passed on, she began having conversations with him. And that every trouble or burden that she would have after he'd passed on, she would speak to him and say, I'm having trouble, you need to take care of this. And somehow, by speaking with the dead, by speaking with her dead father, she was given all kinds of gifts that she never had in the time that he was alive. So I wrote about this. Did you know that our dead ancestors are with us and we can speak to them and ask them to help us in our lives? We can pray to our ancestors to bring us wisdom. We can ask for their assistance and guidance. So as I said, every morning Perdita hands over every worry in her mind to a dead relative to take care of. They are there to answer our wishes. Hand your worries over to those who have passed. And a small section from one of Perdita's posts. As we develop relationships with the dead reveal themselves everywhere. We approach an ancestor in our dining room, lighting a candle, offering food and a prayer or two. We notice that a photo is crooked or has fallen over. As we adjust it, our hands touching the image of someone who has passed on, an aunt, a great-grandmother, or a best friend. Every day they are there, waiting for us to notice them, reach out and connect. Every day is a day of the dead. As we become accustomed to communing with the dead, we may begin to experience their presence as we walk across the land. We come across a rock or a tree and find ourselves pausing. Somehow this place feels like an altar. We may pray to our grandmother and our grandmother feels alive again. We are in a dynamic living relationship with her, even though she's passed on. We hike up a mountain and we begin to feel that that mountain is our father. We follow a stream, knowing its waters are offering us the guidance of eons beyond measure. To commune with the dead is to revive our lost relationship with the earth itself. The whole world is nothing but an ancestor altar to the dead. When we have someone in our life who we love very much, but they're very unhappy and they don't want to be here, we can have very ambivalent feelings when it comes to death and loss. So my grandmother was 90 when she died, and she died a year and a half ago. And before she passed away, I used the Dolores Cannon books as a comfort to make sense of my own feelings and the pain that I was going through. Because, like I said, there is ambivalence when you love somebody and you care for them and you are very close to them, but they continuously tell you day after day that they're not happy, that they would rather not be here, and they are actually in physical pain, a lot of physical pain. You have ambivalent feelings. So on the one hand, you want that person to stay with you for your own selfish reasons, but you can also see that they are not happy and they don't want to be here. And not only that, my nan did start to develop dementia in the last few years, so it was very confusing, and it started to completely play with my own mind, because I, after a while, had no idea whether the way that I was being treated was from a person who knew exactly what she was doing, or whether it was the dementia that was causing her to behave in a certain way. So when my nan died, I was by her bedside and I'd been reading about reincarnation, and I'd been looking at, you know, a lot of the theories of Dolores Cannon, that we, you know, that we have a silver cord and that there will be, you know, a light, sort of like a tunnel of light. And I was sat by my nan's bed, and really I was trying to give her the best send off that I could, because she was still, you know, she was in a coma, but she was still alive. But being an intense researcher myself, and a desperate seeker of what happens and what the truth is, I'd gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole where I'd been listening to people who said that reincarnation is a trap. You know, the wheel of karma, we need to get off that wheel of karma or go down that tunnel of light, then we're just going to get sucked back into this matrix. So I was sat by my nan's bedside, and I said to her, listen, you're going to be leaving soon, because I knew that she was going to be going within the next few hours. And I said, you're going to be going soon. Just think very carefully. I think you're going to see a tunnel of light. Just think very carefully about whether you want to go down that, but just know that you did the best job that you could. And that's what I said to her when she passed away. Personally, I'm trying to figure out a way to improve my own psychic abilities. And I think that one of the ways that you have to do it is to kind of think less. And one of my good friends somebody very special to me, did send me something a couple of days ago, which reinforced this understanding that I have that I need to stop thinking so much and to get things done. And one of my favorite people is Donna Maxine White. And if anybody listening to this knows Donna, then they will know what I mean. One of the things that she said to me on the last time that I saw her is that if you could just shut your mind up for a minute, you've got guides who are trying to give you messages. And so that's something that I'm working on. And in the next episode, I have a very special guest who I met today. And this is Shirley Batty, who is a world-renowned psychic medium and channeler. She's traveled the whole world, and she has agreed to kindly sit down with me, come on the show. So in the next episode, I'm going to be having a chat with her about her life and her work and the books that she's written and some of the stories that she has. But I actually saw her today and I asked her, how can I become more psychic? And she said to me, take a look at the bookshelf there and pick a book. And the first book that I picked up was called Awakening Your Psychic Skills, Using Intuition to Guide Your Life. And that's one of the books that I took. So I'm going to be looking at that. And also she's written many of her own books, but another one of the books that she kindly gave to me was called Channeling, Using Your Own Psychic Powers to Contact Your Spirit Guides. I grew up in a very emotionally stunted household, and I dissociated from so much stuff that was going on that what I'm saying now is to the best of my knowledge, because I really have a hard time in putting into words the way that that I feel. But when it comes to death, my grandmother, I lost her when I was 15, and she was the person who I loved the most in the world. She gave me love like nobody else. She absolutely loved me and I absolutely loved her. She was beautiful. She was like a movie star. And when she died suddenly, when I was the age of 15, it broke the family apart because she was the person that held everybody together. And there was no way to express the emotion that I felt. I don't remember crying. I don't remember seeing anybody cry. I don't remember anybody talking about it. I don't remember being... I remember being not comfortable in talking about it or expressing my emotions, and we just had to move on. And in my own little world, I had to try and make sense of what had happened. This person who I still have dreams about now. So even then, at the age of 15, I was looking into, this can't be the end. This can't be the end. There has to be something after this. And I remember at her funeral, my aunt, who I love very much, was so overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears and got up in the church and wanted to speak. And afterwards, by many other people in my family, she was ridiculed and shamed for expressing emotion in the church. She was ridiculed and shamed and made to feel like she was crazy for expressing a human emotion. And at that age of 15, I was like already frozen, but that made me even more like this is normal. I was led to believe that this was normal. that showing human emotions was a sign of weakness, a sign of craziness, and it's not. And it can take years and years of brain rewiring to realize that expressing emotions is normal. And it's so sad anybody that is not allowed to experience those emotions. And still to this day, I have trouble. Luckily, I have spirituality. I have my friends who I can talk to. And you know, the ways in which our emotions are kind of stifled can lead us to behave in very strange ways, because I've been to funerals since my nan died. My nan when I was 15 that I just spoke about then. And I've been to a couple of funerals where there was drinking, there was drinking maybe before the actual ceremony or at the wake. And I remember at least 2 or 3 times laughing at funerals. And it's only recently that I realized that my laughing was a nervous trauma response to having lived a life of having my feelings and emotions stifled and quietened. Instead of being able to express the emotion in a genuine, normal way, which would be crying for somebody that I cared about, I would actually laugh at funerals. And one in particular, I still remember to this day, where I think, oh my God, they must have thought that I was like insane, that I was like had no emotion, that I just didn't care about them. But actually, the way that I was expressing my emotion was a trauma response because of the ways in which growing up, showing genuine emotion was silenced. So I think becoming aware of that now is really, really, really important. But I do feel sad for the years that I actually spent kind of not being allowed to express my emotions, which is why now I think that when I look at children or when I look at other people who are going through things that I would have gone through, I now try and help them to make sense of their emotions and let them know that their emotions, whatever they're feeling, whether it's anger or sadness or grief, those are real human emotions that need to be expressed, and we shouldn't hold them in. One of the things that Dolores Cannon says is that you're never alone. There's always guides and people looking after you, people looking over you, so that when you're alive and when you die, you're always protected. The bad experiences that we go through are all lessons. There is another podcast that I listen to, which is called the Create Love, Create Freedom podcast, run by my friend Alison Fisher. And she had a guest on where the guest was actually talking about sexual abuse that she had had in her life. And she'd read a book by Brian Weiss called Many Lives, Many Masters, which talks about the wheel of karma, and in the same way that Dolores Cannon talks about reincarnation, that we choose to go through experiences in order to pay back karma from previous lives. I don't know whether this is true, and I don't know whether we can explain away awful circumstances that we experience in our life, such as horrendous trauma, by saying that this is something that we've chosen. This is just the way it is. It's a way of repaying karma by going through bad experiences. I don't know if that's the way that it works, but I do know that for some people, that is how they deal with the trauma that they have experienced or have to experience. Is one way of looking at it. I don't think that life is random and that everything is just the toss of a coin. I personally believe that we've chosen the life that we that we have, and that things happen in the right timing, I guess. Shirley Batty shared a article the other day, which I also reshared. And in this article, written by a 90-year-old, the title is 42 Lessons That Life Taught Me. So this is written by somebody called Regina Brett. And what I'm going to do here is just read out a few of the pieces of advice that I liked the most. Because it's my show. So hopefully some of these you might like as well. So let's go through some of these, shall we? When in doubt, just take the next small step. Cry with someone else. It's more healing than crying alone. Make peace with your past so it won't screw up the present. It's okay to let your children see you cry. So that goes back to what I said before. If a relationship has to be a secret, you shouldn't be in it. Whatever doesn't kill you really does make you stronger. It's never too late to be happy, but it's all up to you and no one else. When it comes to going after what you love in life, don't take no for an answer. Frame every so-called disaster with these words. In 5 years, will this matter? Now, that one there, I actually was going through something a few years ago that was so bad that I had to go to a therapist. And that is the one thing that got me through thinking, in 5 years, will this even matter? And I'm not even going to tell you on this podcast what it was that I actually went there with, but it was so fucking ridiculous. But it was so traumatic at the time. And honestly, the amount of time that I wasted in my own head thinking about that. So, a few more. Time heals almost everything. Give time time. Don't take yourself so seriously. No one else does. That's something that I've absolutely learned from being online. People really don't care. They really don't care as much as you do. All that truly matters in the end is that you loved. And here's one that I absolutely love. If we all threw our problems in a pile and saw everyone else's, we'd grab ours back. That's it with that part. I'm not no more inspirational quotes. Oh yeah, there was something that I was going to actually say. Yeah, so just going back to Dolores Cannon, in one of her interviews, she was asked about these alien abductions. And the interviewer asked her whether she thought that these beings who were abducting people were malevolent, whether they had evil intent. And she said in her interview, no. She said that she'd never hypnotized somebody who had ever had a negative experience. Now, I've read the Convoluted Universe, and in one of those books, one of the people who was hypnotized recounts what I think is a pretty traumatic event where the person is abducted and forced to procreate. So as in, I think that they are however, they're forced to breed basically with the alien, with the being. They're forced to breed with them, so they basically get what's the word? I was going to use the word inseminated, but I don't think that word kind of applies with aliens. But anyway, they get they get inseminated basically with an alien, with with an alien, and then they come back here. They get dropped back here. They are forced to proceed with that pregnancy, and then when it's time for them to give birth, they're abducted again. And the people who recount these stories say it with such fear and terror and trauma. And that's why I think it's very strange when I hear Dolores Cannon saying, no, she's never, hypnotized somebody who's ever recounted a negative experience. Because to me, these experiences sound very, very dark, very negative. And it got to the point where I was reading the Convoluted Universe. This is book 1. I'll include it in the show notes. And some of these things that are going on, I'm like, okay, are these really beings from other star systems, galaxies, planets, whatever you want to call it? Or are these demons? Because they sound like demons to me, the way that she describes some of these situations. And yeah, anybody that's read her books might have an idea of what I'm talking about. It gets quite dark, and it gets to the point where you're like, okay, is Dolores Cannon kind of deluded here when, she's getting, there's people like that she's hypnotized and they're crying and they're coming up with all these traumatic things. I do know at the end of her regression sessions, there is a part, and part of the quantum healing is to actually make sense of some of these things that have happened and, integrate them to make it less traumatic and resolve some of the trauma when these people come round. But just the question that I had really was, okay, are these really aliens from other star systems? Are they benevolent? As are they kind? Are they watching over the earth, as Dolores Cannon would very often put it? Or are they demons? Are they part of our enclosed earth system? Yeah, that's one of my questions. So that's how I think I will end it today. So I hope this has been informative, and I will include the link to my website in the show notes at the bottom there. And this is just going to be really one of many episodes where I talk about metaphysical things and get into it with different ideas that I have. I recently actually had my own past life regression, and I think I'll talk about that on a different episode because I've talked quite a lot today. So thank you for joining me, and hopefully see you back here next time.